Welcome. Just a short afternoon chat. I just thought I'd hop on here for a little bit this afternoon. I had my second Moderna shot. So I'm now a fully vaccinated human being. I will say that the first Moderna shot was okay, just made me a little drowsy afterwards, but that second one, oh boy. Yesterday was a rough day. But I'm here, I'm back, and I thought I would just take the time, even though I'm still a little off. I'll probably be back at 100% tomorrow, but I'm still feeling just a little off from that second vaccine. But I thought I would just hop on here and have a quick chat with all of you. Not too long this afternoon. I've got places to go, stuff to do, etc. But I thought, hey, you all are my community. You're really valuable. And why not take the time to just check in with you all about a few things? Certainly no shortage of world events that we can talk about, and we will get into some of what is happening, in the world. So click the like button, click the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so that you can find out when I'm going to do short notice streams like this one. Not every day that I just jump on in the middle of the afternoon. Eid Mubarak to all my Muslim friends. I know it's certainly hard for many Muslims to be celebrating around this time of year when certain events are taking place. I mean, it's just horrific stuff going on. But yeah, the way we do this is that I give my opening remarks, and as the super chats come in, I take the magical pen and I write them on the magical pad. No magic here. I take my pen and write it on my pad. I write down the super chats. Then we do our roll call, and I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chats, and then we're done. You give me a super chat, I do give you an answer. That's the way the game is played here. So, yeah, I guess we'll just jump right into it. First, the opening remarks with me writing super chats down, then the roll call, and then I answer super chats, and then I'm done. And then we're done for today. And it's going to be a short one today. I don't have that long of opening remarks. I just have basically just two things I want to tell you about. First things first, we're all seeing the horrific videos coming from the Middle East, from Palestine. We're all horrified. Well, I hope you're horrified by what's taking place. You may not be, but I certainly am horrified by what's happening. The Palestinians are in our thoughts and our prayers, and it's just absolutely horrifying what is happening. We've seen stuff like this for so long. And I remember when I was in college, in addition to being frustrated by events like this happening, one thing that always deeply frustrated me was how misinformed people were when they spoke about it. When I was in college, the argument that we constantly heard, and I remember I heard it from person after person after person when I was in college, the small college I went to in Ohio, is people would say, what if Mexico was shooting rockets at America? Wouldn't we do something about it? And I mean, that was the Zionist pro-Israeli talking point. And all these people thought that was such a profound argument. What if Mexico was shooting rockets at the United States? Wow, yeah, we would do something about it. So why is everyone mad at Israel for doing something about people shooting rockets at them? And it's like the amount of ignorance it takes to make that argument, the amount of historical simplism. Is the USA occupying Mexico right now? It's like, is there decades of conflict? Is there, ethnic cleansing? And it's like, no, it's just like Israel. You have to just know that Israel is a country and that there's somebody else shooting rockets at them. And somehow that argument makes sense. And I saw so many people who bought into this, right? All it would take was someone to say to them, well, what if Mexico was shooting rockets at America? Wouldn't we do something about it? oh, yeah, whoa, never thought of that. And it just shocked me how ignorant people could be. I mean, you look at the conflict, the creation of Israel, the ongoing ethnic cleansing, and these people just, they see it as Israel as a country and someone's shooting rockets at them, so they're doing something about it. Oh, okay. It's like this is a people they've been trying to wipe out. I mean, the settlers, the settlement expansion, and my goodness. And it just frustrates me that's what a typical Zionist thinks, right? If you argue with a typical Zionist, and when I say Zionist, I don't mean Jew, okay? And don't think that I'm using Zionist as a code word for Jew. The majority of Zionists in the United States are not Jews; they are Christians, right? The majority of Zionists in the United States are evangelical Christians who believe it is their duty, have been told that it is their duty to support Israel. So don't think that Zionist is a code word for Jew. It is not. In fact, many of the most vehement anti-Zionists that I have met over the years have been Jewish communists. Look at Norman Finkelstein, for goodness sakes. Look at some of the leaders of the Communist Party and some of the leaders of the Socialist Workers' Party and the Workers' World Party, and some of the most vehement and fired up anti-Zionists I've known over years have been Jewish, and some of the most fanatical Zionists I have ever met have been not Jewish, have been Christians. So don't think Zionist is a code word for Jew. We need to make that distinction, right? That Zionism is a political movement that supports a country called Israel. Meanwhile, Judaism is a religion and an ethnic group, and these are two different things. But anyhow, your typical Zionist, the argument that I've heard, they will make arguments frequently. Like they'll say, well, everyone's mad about what Israel does to Palestinians, but what about what Saudi Arabia does to, its population with its beheadings and such? And it's like, I'm mad about that. I've risked my life on a ship trying to get to Yemen to aid the people. It's like somehow everyone criticizing Israel is the result of some kind of rooted anti-Semitism. It can't be a result of what Israel actually does, right? And everything is victimhood. I was once told by one of my coworkers when I worked at an insurance company a long time ago. One of my coworkers told me that every religion other than Judaism, he said, every religion other than Judaism is just something invented to justify killing Jews. And I just thought, that is such a hateful thing to say. You know what I mean? That is just such a hateful thing to say, right? But, he really did believe this. He said that, at the beginning of time, God presented the Torah, and one ethnic group or religion or tribe accepted it, and the rest didn't. And so all the other religions were made up as a way to justify persecuting his group. That's bigoted Zionist thinking, right? That's not how the majority of Jewish people see things. And I know many Jewish people who definitely don't see things that way. But it's like when you have that mindset that everyone else, the only reason they have their other religions is to persecute us, when the only reason anyone could possibly criticize what Israel's doing is because they're motivated by this, desire to carry out anti-Semitic crimes. If people have that mindset, how do you argue with them? Right? Fascism, mass mobilization, violence apply to left governments. Writing down your super chats. What made Palestine liberation less secular? All right, writing your super chats down. I will answer both of those. It's really depressing what's happening in the Middle East. I'm still dealing with the aftermath of my Moderna second dose, so I don't want to dwell on that too much more, but I talked about it. I opened the last stream by talking about what had just happened at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and one thing that is often very carefully covered up is the bigotry of Israeli settlers. That is one thing that U.S. mainstream media works very, very hard to cover up. Israeli settlers are particularly vicious and particularly fanatical, and they do pretty hateful things when they're going to seize someone's home. You can watch videos of them seizing a home of an elderly woman, and they're kicking the family out of the house, and the elderly woman is crying and sobbing as they're trying to kick her out of her house. And the Zionist family that's going to steal her home, from her, they're dancing around and celebrating and laughing as this old woman is sobbing that she's going to lose her home. They sit out in deck chairs in their settlements and watch the bombs fall on local Palestinians and applaud like it's a show. And they think it's a great show, and they'll even do things they think are funny, like they'll give a warning to the Palestinian people that they're going to blow up, and they'll say, oh, we're going to blow you up here, so you better run. And then they'll run, and then they'll blow them up to where they're running, and then they'll laugh about it. It's so funny. There's been weird instances where, they'll take a Palestinian captive and they'll draw Holocaust numbers on their arms. Like somehow it's revenge for the Holocaust that they've taken this Palestinian captive. And you can read about the stuff that Israeli settlers do. The wing of Israeli society that goes into the settlements is particularly vicious. There's a particular ethnic bigotry and just a hatred for the Palestinians that they have. There'll be spray paint that'll say "gas the Arabs," things like that. And U.S. media does a lot to really cover that up. It doesn't want people to see how hateful, how vicious and sadistic, the Israeli settlers can be. But then, after 9/11, there was like one reel of footage of some Palestinians like celebrating, and that was shown on TV to show us the Palestinians were celebrating 9/11. And then later we found out that reel of footage that they showed they weren't even celebrating 9/11. They weren't celebrating 9/11. That's not what was happening. So, it was just, it just shows you how biased American media can be. Distinction between market socialism and socialism. So, that's worth noting as well. But there's not much I can say about these horrendous events that isn't already being said widely. And I'm sure I'm going to be accused of anti-Semitism for saying everything I just said, which is typical. But you have to notice now that that logic is kind of the biggest gift to actual anti-Semitism. When people say that I can't use the phrase bankers, without being anti-Semitic. When people say that, that rich is code for Jew, there's an article written by Jonah Goldberg called Karl Marx's Jew-Hating Conspiracy Theory. They say all anti-capitalism is covert anti-Semitism. Stuff like that is the biggest gift to actual anti-Semitism that exists, right? Actual hatred of Jews on an ethnic or religious basis is very much fueled and protected by that kind of silliness, by that kind of claim that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, use of the word, banker is coded anti-Semitism, criticism of capitalism is anti-Semitic. By doing that, they are actually helping the forces who really do see things in terms of race and do hate Jewish people on an ethnic level, right? Civilized human beings don't hate other people on the basis of their race or their religion, right? They just don't, right? That's just not something that you do, right? It's just pretty basic that you don't say the problem in the world is this race or this ethnic group or that ethnic group or this religion or that religion. You just don't do that. Right? Civilized human beings don't. So anti-Semitism, right? The belief that the problem of the world is Jews, that is not acceptable, right? It's just pretty much not acceptable. And it seems like we as a society have pretty much gotten to the consensus that that's not acceptable, unless it's Muslims. And I've noticed that in the United States, unless it's Muslims, right? It's perfectly acceptable for Zionists to say that Islam is not a real religion. It's just a conspiracy to kill Jews. It's perfectly acceptable for Zionists to say that Islam is not a real religion, it's just a terrorist cult and it needs to be outlawed. It's, perfectly acceptable to say that, that Islam, that if someone's, reading about Islam, they need to be reported to the FBI. But somehow because I don't know why, but the right wing in the United States has made hating Muslims on the basis of their religion acceptable, denying the legitimacy of the Islamic faith legitimate. It's very, very disturbing. So, I'm spending more time here talking about this than I really wanted to, because it's certainly depressing, and I'm still reeling in the aftermath of my Moderna shot. So I'm going to table that. I know we have some Q&A stuff to talk about during, some super chats on that we'll get to. I just wanted to talk about something else, because this is actually quite amusing to me. All right, and this is kind of something I've reflected on for a long time. So this is the Wall Street Journal for today. All right, so we have two articles, one on top of the other here. All right, the top article says little consensus on infrastructure, and this is all about how the infrastructure plan that Joe Biden is proposing to build new bridges and roads and highways and stuff is quite controversial. And there's a huge amount of debate about Joe Biden's infrastructure plan. But below it, U.S. launching $3.2 billion broadband aid program, right? The $3.2 billion broadband aid program, that's going through. The infrastructure, not so much. Now, I'm certainly in favor of low-income people being able to have broadband internet. It's great. They can watch me. They can watch me on YouTube, right? Great. I'm all for low-income people having access to the internet. But why is that not controversial? Why does that go through? While bridges and highways and power plants and water treatment facilities don't. Why is that? And why is Joe Biden's infrastructure plan far, far more controversial than a program to give low-income people access to the broadband internet? Now, obviously, there are some other factors, like the infrastructure plan is way bigger. It's a lot more money. But there's a couple things. First of all, you may not be aware of this, but for many decades in the United States, there has been a program to subsidize cable internet for low-income people. Did you know this? That if you are low income, if you receive food stamps in the United States, the government will subsidize your cable bill. You can get cable at a much, much lower cost if you are a low-income person. And the reason that I'm aware of this is because this was brought up endlessly when I was a child growing up around conservatives as proof that the welfare state is out of control. Look, we're giving poor people free cable. We're giving poor people free cable. What's wrong? Well, it's not free. They have to pay for it, but it's a much reduced cost, right? There are government programs in the United States to give low-income people cable. And why is that? Why is that? Right? We can't give people health care, just a basic access to medical care. Why do we have a program to give low-income people cable? Folks, do you know how many more riots there would be in this country if low-income people did not have access to television, did not have cable? Right? These reforms, a lot of these programs were brought into existence during the aftermath of the 1960s, the Great Society, Lyndon Johnson, and it's 1970s, Nixon. And think about how much more rebellion, and thank you, Max the Sax, for your super chat. Think about how much more unrest there would be in the United States. I'm talking about Fukuyama. All right. I'll take that as your super chat. Think about how much more unrest there would be if low-income people didn't have access to television, right? If low-income people, who are unemployed or chronically unemployed, there would be far more rebellion. And getting low-income people access to broadband internet serves a similar purpose, right? It gets people on social media. They're distracted. On top of that, the kids, how do you think kids go to school during the pandemic? Right? They're on the internet. How do you think people buy things these days, right? They shop on the internet. So it's in the interest of the capitalist system in general to give low-income people access to broadband internet, just like it's in the interest of the capitalist system in general to give low-income people access to cable, right? It's not communism. It's not socialism. It's something that actually makes quite a bit of logical sense, right? That, coming out of the 1960s, there was protests and rebellions among chronically unemployed people, in the urban centers and the black community, huge rebellions. You had the rise of the Black Panther Party, and somebody sat down and said, gee, if we give all the low-income folks television, there's a good chance they won't go out and riot. And so the government and various people said, okay, that's a good idea. And it's kind of a handout to the cable companies. Not like the government just, it just comes directly from the government. The government subsidizes private cable companies. So it's a subsidy to private cable companies. They're getting paid the full price for it. It's just the government foots some of the bill to make sure the low-income people have it. So the cable companies benefit from it. Advertisers benefit from it because all those people that have access to cable provided to them by the government are watching advertisements. And this is something that, libertarians don't seem to understand. That capitalism often will do things like, give low-income people access to cable or broadband internet because it serves capitalism. Jeff Bezos, the capitalist, makes a lot more money because low-income people will now have access to broadband internet. Cable companies make a lot more money because of it. Look, agribusiness benefits from food stamps. None of this is socialism. None of this is socialism. This is just an attempt to stabilize capitalist society. There's less riots and rebellions because low-income people have TV to distract them. There are more people watching advertisements, so there's more advertising revenue created. There's a subsidy to the cable companies that perform an important service in providing television. It makes a lot of sense, right? It makes sense from the standpoint of trying to maintain the capitalist system. This is how liberals used to talk, right? Liberals used to talk this way, and this used to just be kind of the common sense for managing a capitalist society. It wasn't really until the rise of neoliberal economics, Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, and Friedrich von Hayek, and Alan Greenspan, that we got this notion that suddenly the government giving anything to anybody is a crime, right? If it weren't for food stamps, right, a lot of big agribusiness companies would lose lots and lots of money. From what I understand, there were some protests in the 1990s trying to keep the SNAP program and Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, that were sponsored by Kraft, right? Kraft, that's that it's that very inexpensive macaroni and cheese. Well, they wouldn't sell a lot of it if it weren't, they don't want food stamps to go away. This is just logical from a capitalist perspective. Now, what's certainly disturbing is you would think it would be logical from a capitalist perspective to also do Joe Biden's plan. It's just like in order to have a capitalist economy nowadays, you need people to have broadband internet, you need people to have cable in their homes. You would think you also need paved roads. You'd think that you also need, the water to be properly purified. You'd think you'd also need power plants that are functional, right? You'd think that they kind of go together, right? Just like you want people to be able to get on the internet and shop in our high-tech economy, and you want, kids that are stuck at home during a pandemic to be able to go to school so they have internet at their house, and you want people not to be out and rioting and rebelling, so you give them television, and you want to subsidize the cable companies, and you want to subsidize the advertisers, and so, you would think that makes sense, but why is it that there's an understanding on the part of our leaders, a consensus practically on the part of our leaders, that it's okay to give poor people TV, it's okay to give poor people internet access, but giving all of society roads, giving all of society clean drinking water, giving all of society electricity, there's not so much of a consensus around it. Why is that? Well, it's because we have entered a slow growth era. At this point, the strategy of the most powerful capitalists is not to create a strong U.S. economy. The strategy of the most powerful capitalists is de-industrialization of the United States and the submerging of the U.S. economy into a global low-wage apparatus, right? And this is the big divide. This is the divide between the Trumpers and the Biden folks. This is the divide now, is that the lower-level capitalists who were part of the once booming domestic U.S. economy, but weren't as internationally connected and were more tied to the wages of average Americans being higher, they want to bring back the good old days. They want to bring back the industrial boom of the United States. They want to bring back the heartland. But it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. Meanwhile, Biden represents that Eastern establishment, that managerial bourgeoisie. And he's put forward this infrastructure plan, but it's very, very controversial, and we'll see how much of it actually gets done. At this point, a very big chunk of the U.S. ruling class view the population as expendable and as a burden and as a dangerous mob that needs to be managed and controlled. And that's what's going on here. They see the population of the United States not as an asset, not as people they could potentially hire and make lots of money from, but rather as this obnoxious horde that is getting in their way. This is very, very disturbing. The agenda of one section of the ruling class very much seems to be one of arguing that they no longer need a comfortable, prosperous middle class in the United States. But what they do need, more than anything, they do need to control the rabble and make sure that average Americans are not going out and protesting and not going out and rebelling. And that's what I think is behind the push to legalize drugs right now, the push for, legalizing drugs. And, I'm all for ending the criminalization of drugs. I think people should not be punished for using drugs. And I'm all for, providing treatment and such. But the push now, the big push in the media, how amazing hallucinogens are. Oh, wow, hallucinogens cure PTSD. You really believe that? You really believe somebody just takes a hit of acid and their PTSD just melts away? Some veteran who's been in a horrendous war, he just takes a hit of acid and all of a sudden, oh, wow, he never has PTSD anymore. Do you believe that? It might help, maybe, but, there's a big push right now for marijuana, for LSD, for hallucinogens. They're putting all the kids on Ritalin and different drugs when they're kids to try and control them. And they're trying to manage the population of the United States as they gradually phase them out. I mean, that's what's going on. They're trying to phase out the U.S. population. They see the U.S. population as expendable. They see the United States population as a potential liability. They see them as getting in the way of the agenda of imperialism. And because of that, they are basically not really interested in rebuilding the United States of America. And this is very, very disturbing, folks. This is what's going on. I mean, this is their agenda. They are canceling the American middle class, the American working class generally, and they are collapsing the U.S. economy into a global low-wage police state. This is the divide. And, yes, we don't want to appeal to bigotry and we don't want to appeal to national chauvinism, right? But at the end of the day, it's this divide and this transition that creates an opening for those of us who understand socialism. It creates an opening for us to put forward our agenda of a government of action that fights for working families, our agenda of demanding that the state protect working families, our agenda of construction and historical optimism in the face of pessimism. So there you go. I mean, that's really all I've got to say on that. And like I said, I'm a little tired. I'm still reacting. My Moderna vaccine was a little bit much, but there you go. So that kind of concludes my opening remarks for today. Not too long. So why don't we call you out as I see you, names and locations. Then I'll answer your super chat questions, and then we'll be done. So who's here? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Elias from Finland. Texas. Joey from Belize. Hello from Las Vegas, says JM. Warrington, UK. Wisconsin. Los Angeles, Charlie in Glasgow, Scotland, Io Hillary in New York City, Nashville, Alan from Chicago, hi Caleb, Longview, Northern Michigan, Austin, Texas, Max the Sax, very good, Miguel in Puerto Rico, Brad from St. Louis, Balthazar in Oakland, Gateshead, England, Richie in Staten Island, Bermuda, Brazil, Ipswich, Liz and Bartaz in Ireland, very good, Mo in Toronto, Gina in Fort Smith, John in Houston, Miroslav, Serbia, Munich, East Germany, Netherlands, Joshua Tree, Kinky is with us, good friend of the program. Queens, Holly from Queens is with us. Solidarity from Valencia. Pennsylvania, USA, says Christian Dissident. Pomona, California. Peter in Manchester, UK. Pete in Houston, Michigan, right? Philly and San Diego. Mohsen from Iran, right? Joe Gale from Nassau County. Welcome, Joe. Always a good friend of the program. Jason Sarna in Vallejo, California. Let's make you an admin. We'll make you a moderator. You're a moderator now. Jason Sarna. All right, Sweden, Auckland, New Zealand. Daniel from Seattle. Tim, Leipzig, East Germany. Cyprus. Very good, folks. Very, very good. Ivan from Yugoslavia, right? Steve in Michigan. Very, very good. Hi, Caleb from Italy. Hi, back to you from the United States. Mitchell from the Netherlands. Did you watch my economic planning documentary? Haven't had a chance yet. I'll have to go check that out. Northern California. So there you go. All right. All right, folks. Kentucky. Folk song is from Kentucky. All right. So now I'm going to start answering the Super Chat questions. If folks have more Super Chat questions, I will answer those as they come in. And then we will be done. So there you go. That's how we're going to do it. So the first question here came from someone who thought my definition of fascism was not correct, because they said, fascism, you said it means, feel better, Caleb, my second Pfizer threw me for a loop. Thank you, Io Hillary. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it's yesterday was pretty awful. Today, I'm almost at full speed. Thought I'd check in with all of you. But there you go. I did get to go on Crosstalk, RT Crosstalk, right before I had my second dose. So that was pretty neat. If you haven't seen that episode of Crosstalk with Peter Lavelle, that was really something special. Last time I went on Crosstalk was in 2014 to talk about the Ukraine crisis. I circled back to Crosstalk. I don't know what that scandal is. Mensayo scandal? I don't know what that is. I just don't know what that is, ThinkPad. But yeah, so check out that Crosstalk episode. That was really something special. We talked about socialism. I think Peter Lavelle really liked the episode. I think the other two guests did a great job, and we talked about socialism, so check that out. Very, very good, and thank you for the super chats. Any more things people want to talk to me about, just super chat them to me. All right, so the first super chat was from someone who thought my definition of fascism was not correct. And they said that I said fascism is a mass mobilization of violence, and couldn't that not apply to leftist governments also? Well, it's not simply a mass mobilization of violence. It is a mass mobilization of violence and destruction with the aim of holding off and resolving a capitalist crisis. It's an attempt to resolve a capitalist crisis with destruction. Whereas, there are forms of Bonapartism that don't do that. Roosevelt was a left Bonapartist. He may have mobilized society, but it wasn't for the purpose of destruction. He wasn't trying to tear society down and reduce the population. He was doing the opposite. He was trying to build society up. Mobilization of construction, right? Louis Bonaparte definitely built this army of lumpen elements that engaged in terror and destruction, but he also built railroads, and he was all about building, right, and construction. And that it's not simply violence, okay? It's violence to destroy in order to resolve a capitalist crisis. The idea is we will solve the problems of the capitalist economy, the problem of overproduction. We will do that. We will solve those problems by destroying and beating down a big chunk of society with concentration camps, with mobilizing for war, etc. And that's the definition. And that's why it doesn't apply to left governments. You could argue that maybe the Cultural Revolution had an element of that. The Gang of Four, perhaps, there was a fascist streak to the way they operated, right? Their view that there was going to be World War III, their use of, they were trying to to basically hold back economic development in China. So perhaps the Gang of Four, even though they were doing it in a socialist country, perhaps there's some argument that they had a fascistic edge to them. But for the most part, that's why it doesn't apply. How do we point out the DSA liberals that they use the same talking points as libertarians when comparing Stalin to Hitler? Okay. DSA liberals, same talking points as libertarians. Very good, very, very good. We'll talk about that. All right. Now, the person asked, what made Palestine liberation less secular? Well, that was mainly, and this is public record, right? This is factual, right? I mean, it sounds conspiratorial, but it is factual. During the 1980s, there was covert support for the Muslim Brotherhood by Israel, that Israel began covertly supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and other entities to push back against the Marxist-Leninist wing of the Palestinian resistance. Right, that in the 1970s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, Palestinian resistance was dominated by communists. Right, it was dominated by Marxist-Leninists. Yasser Arafat was good friends with Fidel Castro and good friends with a lot of the Marxists in the world, and Palestinian resistance was recognized by the Soviet Union. Mao supported the Palestinians, and that the Palestinians were led by Marxist-Leninists, and the USA realized that was a problem, and so did Israel. And so it is now a matter of fact, right? It sounds conspiratorial. You could look this up. Israel admits that it started covertly funding the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is a religious movement from Egypt, and it was created in Egypt in the 1920s, but it really took off in the 1950s when it started being covertly funded by the CIA to fight Abdel Nasser. Abdel Nasser was the leader of Egypt, and he was an Arab socialist. He did a lot of construction projects. He built the Aswan Dam, which is the biggest power plant in the Middle East, and he was pro-Soviet, and he was friendly. And so in response to that, the CIA started funding this religious movement in Egypt of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, what makes the Muslim Brotherhood interesting is the Muslim Brotherhood, they are Sunni Muslims. They're not Wahhabis, right? Wahhabis favor like a Saudi government, and they want to restore the time of, they want to go back to all the rules of the time that Muhammad was alive. Whereas the Muslim Brotherhood favors modernization. It favors modernization. It argues that you can have a democratic elected government in Islam. It rejects all nationalism, arguing that there should be unity of Muslims on the basis of their religion, that there's no Arabs, there's no Persians, there's no Turks, it's just they're all Muslims. It rejects all nationalism, and it really hates communism. And the Muslim Brotherhood argues that there's nothing wrong with capitalism, just so long as everyone's a Muslim, right? That the problems of capitalism are really the problem of a lack of religion. And that's the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, it's small business owners. It's a petty bourgeois movement in Egypt that was threatened by Abdel Nasser and Arab socialism. And so they mobilized to kill communists and to murder communists in Egypt, and to assassinate communists and to assassinate leaders of Arab socialism. And they expanded throughout the Middle East. In Syria, there were CIA-backed uprisings by the Muslim Brotherhood during the 1980s. It's a current in the Muslim world, the Muslim Brotherhood. And, at this point, the Muslim Brotherhood current is aligned with Qatar and is aligned with Turkey. The government of Turkey and Erdogan and the government of Qatar are the main backers of the Muslim Brotherhood current, right? And the Muslim Brotherhood, there are different factions within that view, but it is a wing of Sunni Islam that argues, it's in favor of modernization, and it vehemently argues in favor of capitalism and free market capitalism. It rejects all nationalism, and on top of that, it's vehemently anti-communist. And that's the Muslim Brotherhood. And Hamas is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it is documented that during the 1980s, Israel funded Hamas, what became Hamas, it wasn't called that then, funded them as a pushback against the Marxist-Leninist wing of the Palestinian resistance. And that's a fact. That's a historical fact. Now, obviously, they don't like them anymore, right? Obviously, they don't like them anymore. But during the 1980s, they were seen as less dangerous than and, the Marxist-Leninist Palestinian resistance. So, why is Palestinian resistance less secular? A lot of that has to do with and then the Soviet Union fell, right? And so the socialist world became significantly weaker. But so the Muslim Brotherhood currents, the Muslim Brotherhood school of thought, very much became the predominant view among Palestinian resistance, and that gave the rise of Hamas. That's Hamas comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood current. It started out as the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. So there you go. And the main divide, I should add, in the pro-U.S. or pro-imperialist wing of the Muslim world is on the one hand, you have the Wahhabis, and those are Saudi-aligned forces that favor the Saudi monarchy, that favor a very, very strict interpretation. They're fundamentalists. You can call them Islamic fundamentalists, Wahhabis. And then on top of that, you have the Muslim Brotherhood current. So you basically have Saudi Arabia versus Qatar and Turkey. And those are the two divides. And, they have different viewpoints. Qatar and Turkey favor negotiations with Iran. Saudi Arabia, until recently now, they are negotiating with Iran. But until recently, it appeared Saudi Arabia favored hostility toward Iran and escalating an arms race in the region, a new Cold War, an Arab NATO against Iran. So there are differences. There are differences among them, right? The Muslim Brotherhood appears to be much more anti-Israel than the Saudis are, right? Saudi-aligned countries like United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have just recognized Israel, right? We know that there is Saudi and Israeli intelligence cooperation going on. So Saudi Arabia is not very anti-Israel. It makes anti-Israel statements, but at this point, two of their puppet states, Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, have recognized Israel. And then on top of that, Saudi and Israeli intelligence are cooperating. Whereas, the Muslim Brotherhood remains very hostile to Israel. Turkey, Qatar, they make very anti-Israel statements, right? Hamas is certainly shooting rockets at Israel. So, so there's a division there. Now, the Shia current in the Middle East that's aligned with Iran is anti-imperialist through and through. I mean, they are fully anti-imperialist. Whereas, these other two currents, the Turkish, Qatari current and the Saudi current, they tend to be pro-imperialist and they have different interests. And that's worth pointing out. And that until really the fall of the Soviet Union, the overthrow of the invasion of Iraq also was significant, till the overthrow of Iraq and the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a largely secular wing of the Palestinian resistance. There was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. Was a very big current. Layla Khalid, who's kind of a folk hero. I believe she hijacked some airplanes and such, and she's, a folk hero among the Palestinians. Layla Khalid. She was from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, and they are an explicitly Marxist-Leninist current. There is the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the DFLP. And there was a Ba'ath army called the Arab Liberation Organization, and that was, Palestinians that were aligned with Ba'athist Arab socialism and with Saddam Hussein. And there were some other currents as well, but there was a secular wing of the Palestinian resistance that was very big in the 1970s and 80s. Not so much anymore. Not so much anymore. Involved payments made by Lula in exchange for votes. Okay, we'll talk about Lula. Yeah, we'll talk about that, Lula da Silva. I didn't know the name of the scandal. All right, so next question. What's the distinction between market socialism and socialism? Well, there isn't one, right? Socialism is socialism. Sometimes socialism has a market, sometimes it doesn't, right? I mean, the Soviet Union, for the most of the Soviet Union's existence, there was like 90% state ownership. Well, in the 1920s, you had the new economic policy. After the new economic policy, Stalin had his 5-year plans. And at that point, you got like what they called really existing socialism, the Cold War socialist model. And that's a model in which there's overwhelming state ownership, almost complete state ownership. But, China, in the late 1970s, they started having a market sector. Cuba has a market sector. Vietnam has the, socialist-oriented market economy. But at the end of the day, they're all socialist countries. You know, the USSR was socialist. You know, socialism exists in Vietnam, it exists in Cuba. The difference between capitalism and socialism is how is production being carried out? If the economy is organized for the profits of private owners, that's capitalism. Friedrich Engels said capitalism is a system where the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Mao Zedong said that capitalism is profits in command. However, socialism is when the means of production are organized, you know, to serve all of society. Friedrich Engels talks about how socialism is production upon a predetermined plan. Right? When you have state control of the economy, when the economy is being organized to serve public good and not profits, that's socialism. That's the difference. Now, you can have a market sector in socialism. You can have not a market sector in socialism. Socialism is when the means of production are controlled by society. When you have, you know, industries and an economy that is being planned out by the state, that's socialism. China, with its market sector, that's socialism. Vietnam, that's socialism. You know, back when the Soviet Union had a fully state-run economy, that was socialism. You know, I don't make a distinction between market socialism and socialism. I think that there are different forms of socialism, and that Cold War really existing socialism had a lot of strengths and certainly made great achievements. It industrialized Russia and made Russia an economic superpower. That's very important. You know, furthermore, what else happened? You know, with really existing socialism, the Nazis were defeated, space travel was invented, the AK-47 rifle was invented. I mean, the whole, you know, I mean, the huge chunk of the world was electrified. Illiteracy was wiped out. I mean, education was made available to people. I mean, the achievements of really existing socialism in the world is very, very massive. So you can't deny that really existing socialism had its achievements, but it had problems. It needed an adjustment. So that's how I mean, I don't distinguish between the two. They're just different forms of socialism. All right, so Max the Sax was asking about Francis Fukuyama. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Francis Fukuyama, he wrote this book called The End of History. What's interesting about it was, if I understand the arguments correctly, Francis Fukuyama was saying that Marx's worldview, you know, was largely correct, except that capitalism is the end of history, right? So most adherents of capitalism do not accept, you know, the Marxist historical materialist history of the world. They do not accept that first we had hunter-gatherer civilization, and then out of necessity we moved toward slavery, and eventually feudalism, and then eventually we got capitalism. Most adherents of capitalism and defenders of capitalism don't believe that. Francis Fukuyama, he argued that Marx was largely correct about why feudalism was brought down, about how history marches forward, but he was wrong in thinking that it would lead to socialism, right? That he argued that capitalism is the end of history, it's the final system, and that was based largely on the fall of the Soviet Union. It was a rationalization for why the Soviet Union fell. And Francis Fukuyama, he does a lot of writing. You can read, he's written all kinds of stuff. He's a philosopher, you know, who writes basically analysis. You know, I mean, you can read him, you know, they publish him, Council on Foreign Relations. He's one of these academics that gets rolled out as an ideologue for the West. He's a Western ideologue, and the height of his career was this concept of the end of history. All righty. How do we point out to DSA liberals that they are using the same talking points as libertarians when they say Hitler was a leftist? Yeah, this is interesting, right? That for years, conservatives have been trying to argue that Hitler was somehow a man of the left. Hitler was not a man of the left. He viewed himself as a conservative. He thought he was, he argued he was trying to recreate a great German civilization, restore the Reich. It was the Third Reich. You know, he was, going to bring back Germany's glory days, make Germany great again, the Germanic traditions of the past, mysticism, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the Middle Ages, Wagner. Nazism is entirely a right-wing philosophy, right? Paul Robeson. ultra. It's entirely a right-wing philosophy. But according to people on the right, because it is critical of capitalism, it must be a left-wing movement. And that's not true. One can be critical of capitalism from the right. One can argue that money and profits and the market are weakening traditional values. One can argue that, and that's very common. Marx acknowledges this. He spends the back of the Communist Manifesto going over reactionary socialism, conservative socialism, that in Marx's day, especially when capitalism was very new, many of the people criticizing it were not leftists at all. They were conservatives. They wanted to go back to feudalism. And they just, they didn't like it from the right. They thought it was too liberating, right? And Marx praises capitalism. He spends the opening pages of the Communist Manifesto praising capitalism, because he thinks it's great because it's tearing apart these traditional hierarchical structures. So this is like delusional, right? But libertarians cannot comprehend that one can be on the right and criticize capitalism. It doesn't occur to them. It's never occurred to them, right? They think, and I mean, I've had this argument. Dinesh D'Souza is not a libertarian, he's a Republican. Annoys me the greatest because it's like this notion that all conservatives must be 1980s neocon Republicans. I mean, that's just not reality. It's just not reality. It's just not reality, right? And that there are politics is much more complex than that. And that, yes, the Nazis criticized capitalism. It was a capitalist economy, though. They never changed property relations, right? I mean, they didn't nationalize very much. Very little was nationalized by the Nazis. In fact, the word privatization is even, rooted in Nazism. The Nazis basically invented that word. They created the world's first military-industrial complex. They created the world's first prison-industrial complex. But very little was nationalized. A lot of these companies, they did have corporations that were subsidized by the state. The government helped out corporations, right? Especially like, Volkswagen got free labor from concentration camp prisoners. But it wasn't. It at no point was there, a change in capitalist relations. I mean, it was a capitalist free market economy with government subsidy of the military and government subsidy of different things. I mean, they built the Autobahns, but the overwhelming majority of capitalist institutions in Germany were never nationalized, right? Krupp, the huge, Krupp and Thyssen, right? The big steel manufacturing, never privatized, right? All kinds of private banking, private lending of money, right? If you really want to understand the economics of Nazi Germany, you should read a book called Hitler's Banker, which is a biography of Hjalmar Schacht. Hjalmar Schacht was the economist of Nazi Germany, and he was a banker who basically, when he saw that communist revolution was on the horizon, that he made an alliance with Hitler, and he went around to different German industrialists and all of them and got them to sign on with Hitler. Hitler was the puppet of bankers. He was useful to bankers. And Hjalmar Schacht was the banker who basically, got the rest of the German capitalist class to sign up behind Hitler. Nothing socialist about Nazi Germany. I mean, it was largely a capitalist economy, a lot of government spending on weapons, a lot of government spending on prison camps. But other than that, I mean, they built the Autobahn highways. They built these 5 highways. Was it 5? How many Autobahns are there? These highways across Germany because they didn't want to have another two-front war. They wanted to be able to move troops across the highways. And that was it. I mean, it was a death economy. It was an economy based on destruction, subsidizing capitalism by taking a big chunk of the workforce and making them into concentration camp slaves, putting the rest in military uniforms, militarizing society, and trying to use the state to beat people down and destroy people in the hopes of stabilizing a capitalist economy. And it worked for a couple years, right? I mean, there was a big economic boom immediately after Hitler took power because they immediately stopped paying their loans back to American and British banks. They canceled all the debt, number one. After that, they restarted military spending. And on top of that, they broke the labor movement and they put a big chunk of the workforce into concentration camps, so they weren't out competing with other people for jobs. And then they hired a bunch of people to run the concentration camps. And so, they were able to subsidize the economy. That's fascism, right? And there's nothing, it wasn't a planned economy. And the economy was ready to collapse in 1939. The economy, the reason that Kristallnacht and all these, there was a huge upsurge in the anti-Semitism and the repression of Jews leading up, and then there was, the outbreak of World War II, was largely because of the fact that the German economy was about to collapse, that all the military spending and all that wasn't going to work, and they had to get, a war going, basically, to keep the German economy going. They had made death and war basically a subsidy for the state, and so the next logical conclusion was they had to go to war, right? And this idea of living space, there was just not enough space for us. We got to expand these different areas. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was all about war. So there you go. Yeah, and the fact that liberals talk this way is very disturbing. Liberals always knew that fascism was on the right, right? Liberals always knew that. They always knew that. And now, because they're trying to smear people on the left who they don't like, liberals have, it's fallen out of the back of their heads. The DSA crowd has suddenly decided that if you're a leftist, you can be anti-racist, you can be anti-war, you can be all these things, but if you don't agree, if you defend existing socialist countries, if you don't go along with their attacks on middle America, you must be a Nazbol, you must be a red brown, you must be a crypto-fascist. So they've accepted this lie that conservatives have been putting out for decades. Dinesh D'Souza and their distortion, their claim, well, Hitler must have been a leftist because he's bad, and no one on the right could ever do anything bad. It's like that kind of logic, right? Because it's basically it's now liberals are accepting it in order to persecute the legit forces on the left. So it's pretty disturbing to see that. So there you go. The next super chat question is about Lula da Silva. Well, he was the president of Brazil, and he was quite effective as a leader. He created a lot of social programs that really benefited people, food subsidies, expanded education in the country, presided over the construction of power plants, hydroelectric power plants with China's help. But he wasn't a socialist. He was a social democrat, right? He did not change property relations in Brazil. It wasn't like Venezuela, wasn't like Bolivia. It was much more of a middle-of-the-road approach. They were friendly to the United States and friendly to the socialist countries. Much more middle of the road. They created a lot of social programs to aid people from the Workers' Party of Brazil. They didn't change property relations. They didn't move towards socialism. So Lula da Silva, he moved out of office. He was replaced by Dilma Rousseff, and she was in office, also from the Workers' Party. And they were, Dilma Rousseff was impeached. She was removed from office. There was a corruption scandal. And then after that, they imprisoned Lula da Silva. And the reason they imprisoned Lula da Silva was they wanted to keep him from running for president. And the main reason that they wanted to keep him from running for president is because he would have won. Every poll showed that Bolsonaro would have lost to Lula da Silva. And now we have the transcripts. It's been leaked that at his trial, he was charged on corruption charges. At his trial, the prosecutor and the judge were texting each other the entire time to make sure they convicted Lula da Silva. This has been released. It's been revealed. Their texts were leaked to the media. You can read the texts from the judge and the prosecutor. And hilariously, in those texts, the prosecutor actually admits that he doesn't have very much of a case, right? And he's asking the judge for advice. How do we do this? Because the whole thing, it was a frame-up. They railroaded Lula da Silva to jail in order to keep him from running for president because he could win. Well, now he's out of jail. Now, the legal struggle has forced the situation that he's out of jail. So Lula da Silva's out of jail, and he's gotten much more radical. In jail, now he's gotten out of jail. He's praising North Korea. He sounds much more anti-imperialist, and it seems like, Lula da Silva has become much more radical as a result of the frame-up, and as a result of his imprisonment, and seeing that, no matter how much he tried to play ball with the imperialists, they weren't going to tolerate it. So that raises the question. Bolsonaro is wildly unpopular for how he's mishandled the pandemic. Brazil's economy has been wrecked. So then the question is, what will happen next? It looks like if there's going to be another election in Brazil, Lula da Silva may win. So what are they going to do? Oh, my goodness. Well, that picture behind me is getting weird. But anyway, what are they going to do, right? There's a very good chance that Lula da Silva may win the next election. But now Lula da Silva is much more radical, and the Workers' Party of Brazil has significantly moved to the left as a result of the persecution that's been rained down on them. So that's gonna be interesting. I don't know what's going on with that screen behind me, but not much I can do about it. I'll just turn it off. So anyway, the next super chat question I had was on Paul Robeson. Now, Paul Robeson, for those who are not familiar, Paul Robeson was a very, very high-achieving person. So many ways, a high-achieving person. An actor who was widely loved on Broadway, and an amazing musician and singer. You know, I believe he was a very, very effective athlete. You know, he's from New Jersey. And he was just a very, very high-achieving celebrity, an African-American celebrity in the 1930s, who was recruited to the Communist Party because he was opposed to racism, because he saw that his people suffered horrendously because of Jim Crow segregation and racism. He was recruited to communism, and he joined the Communist Party. I believe he actually became a member of the Communist Party. And you know, he sent his kids to school in the Soviet Union because he didn't want them to go to school in racist America. He was very sympathetic to the Soviet Union and their politics and their anti-imperialism. And I believe it is confirmed now that at one point they did put LSD, the CIA put LSD into his drink, I believe, in order to induce insanity, right? You know, if you give someone hallucinogens, I mean, it's never good to take hallucinogens. It's never good for your mental health, in my view. But on top of that, if the person does not know they've been given hallucinogens, right, and they just start seeing things, it's particularly bad. Yeah, and they you know, gave him drugs in order to, you know, cause him psychological problems. And he did have some very intense psychological problems, and that probably contributed to it very significantly. When he was in the Soviet Union, the CIA did apparently slip him hallucinogens, and that's a matter of public record. You can read about this. It's very horrible. They were angry. The CIA was angry that there was this prominent black intellectual who was such an admirer of the Soviet Union, and they slipped him some LSD, which is, you know, it's quite a dangerous thing you can do to a person. So there you go. There you go. All right, folks. Well, it looks like I'm pretty tired, and I'm at the end of my rope anyway, and we're out of super chats. So I think it's been a short stream. We're just going to cut it off here because I'm a little tired. I'm still recovering from my second Moderna shot. Hopefully tomorrow I'm back up at full speed and I can join you. It's been fun. I'm a little low energy today, but I just thought we'd have a little chat. But some very exciting things are happening. I don't want to say too much. Can't really get into it too much. But even as I'm pretty tired, some very exciting developments are in the works. Some very, very good things are going to happen soon. This is going to be a summer of unique events. This is going to be a summer of good developments. I'm very excited about some events that are going to be happening very soon, as much as they are kind of stressing me out. I've taken on a lot of responsibility, but that's okay. And some very, very good events will be happening soon, and you'll all eventually hear about them. And hopefully at some point pretty soon I'll be having public events I can just tell you all about. But some very good events are going to be happening, and some good developments are happening. And our view of things, our Center for Political Innovation, anti-imperialist, constructive socialism, our viewpoint is on the march. Many, many people are looking for what only we have to offer, and it's very, very exciting. I remind myself when I see all the horrors of the current time we're in, I remind myself that we're living in the last days of American capitalism. We're living in the last days of the empire. And that as much as we admire the 1930s revolutionaries, as much as we admire the 1960s revolutionaries, they would all kill to be in our shoes. Because this time it can really happen, right? There wasn't going to be a revolution in the 30s. There wasn't going to be a revolution in the 60s. But I do believe the United States will soon transition towards socialism. Give it a couple decades, I think we're seeing the very beginnings of the unraveling of U.S. capitalism and imperialism and the transition of the United States towards socialism. I mean, we are living in the last days of American capitalism and imperialism. And we're very, very lucky. As hard as it seems, as difficult as things seem, we are very, very, very lucky to be alive in this time, because now it's really, really possible. It's very, very, very possible that we will see an end to this empire. And all of us on this stream, look, we're going to have to play a very big part of it, right? Because we know that the synthetic left isn't going to bring us socialism. You think Jabba the Vosh and Skippy the Bear are going to create socialism? No, right? I mean, if the only type of socialism that's actually going to fix things here is going to be a constructive socialism, a progressive socialism, a socialism that's about building and not destruction. And, we have our handbook. We are city builders, right? And we're on the move, and a lot of good things are happening. So I'm a little low energy today. I apologize for that. I'm glad that we could just check in for a little bit. But stay strong, folks. We are on the march. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families.